Hey all, Baruch Levy, Rabbi B here, coming to you live from Denver, Colorado, soul-centered. I was just on a second ago, had some technical difficulties, but hopefully that's all behind us now. If you can't hear me, just jump into the sidebar and let me know. Hopefully you can hear this. It's coming through loud and clear. I'm going to share this to my personal page, and then we are off and running. This is called what I call the meaning experience. Soul Centered is a center for loss, meaning, and healing. And so the meaning experience is really diving into meaning, to meaningful things within our lives, to extract meaning. I'm a student of Dr. Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, founder of logotherapy, meaning-centered therapy, who really dives deep into this idea of meaning and um, the importance of it in our lives, that we can ultimately get through anything, to get through anything we need to be able to find meaning within it. And so that's what we do here in the Meaning Experience. We explore relevant, hopefully timely conversations and topics. And tonight I want to talk about insights from Israel's Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaAtzmaut, Israel's Independent or Memorial Day and Independence Day. I think it's a profoundly beautiful model for us to really consider in in this world today and in our lives, about how to navigate when life's darkness descends. You know, I've been a student of life's darkness, kind of actively seeking meaning within it for probably, I don't know, 25 years or so. When I was 15 years old, as many of you know, my grandmother took her life. She completed suicide. And that was tragic, of course. It's tragic, but it's also what I call tragedy compounded because of the way we dealt with it. My family dealt with it or didn't deal with it. And so, really, have been very passionate about dealing with life's darkness proactively ever since. I was just a kid. It took me a few years to kind of be able to articulate that and to figure out what that means and what that means to me. But I watched my father over the next 20 some years not deal with it well. And as I've written about many times, and wrote a book about it, he took his own life 15 years ago. Wrote a book called Spark Seekers, Mourning with Meaning, Living with Light, really diving deep into how to make a different choice. I didn't want to be a third generation to follow in my family's footsteps. And so really for the past 25 years, I've been seeking meaning within life's darkness and teaching other people how to seek meaning and navigate through it. And so it's taken me through all kinds of studies and pursuits and explorations, Buddhism and Hinduism and lots of different philosophies, self-help movement, New Ageism, and I found great wisdom in lots of them. But where I've probably drawn the greatest wisdom that's really impacted the way I think about and navigate the darkness is Kabbalah. So in Jewish mysticism, in Kabbalah, there's this basic idea, which is true to to science and to human experience, that life begins in darkness. If you take the universe was ultimately born out of the darkness, right? The Big Bang is an explosion of light and life out of the darkness. If you look at an embryo in its mother's womb, right, growing and developing, where does it grow and develop? It grows and develops in the darkness. And so the darkness is a starting point. It's just a part of the world we live in and the reality that we've inherited. And all beginnings take place in the darkness. And so darkness really doesn't have to be an end. It shouldn't be an end. It should be a beginning. But my family, it was in many ways an end. We weren't allowed to talk about what I call the dark Ds. Certainly death, and the death of my grandmother was off limits. We were not allowed to talk about it. A few times I brought it up with my dad and was really just shushed. Divorce. All of my aunts and uncles, I believe, divorced, remarried, but we weren't allowed to talk about the process. My parents ended up divorcing. And as a young person, I wasn't a kid, but certainly in my late teens, early 20s, I had questions. I wanted to know, wanted to be able to explore. And there were just these certain things, the dark Ds, that were off limits. And really believe deeply that The silence is ultimately what killed my father. I wrote him lyrics, and I've written a lot about this in my book, Spark Seekers, but I wrote him the lyrics to the song Simon and Garfunkel's Sound of Silence. And in it, I wrote the lyrics like a silence like a cancer grows. And I watched the silence overtake him. And I've seen it with other people that I guide. I counsel people and guiding them through life's darkness. And the only way to shatter the darkness is through light. And what is light? Light is words. Light is speech, communication. Right? That's the creation story. How does God transform the darkness at the beginning of the story? Is through the word. And in Hebrew, devar is a thing. Literally, it's a thing. It's also a word because words are real. Words have power. And so bringing voice, words, communication, really not just words, to the darkness is the beginning point. And that's why it's so important to face whatever life's darkness, and there's so many others, depression, lots of dark disease, disasters like coronavirus. How do you begin to address them? By addressing them, by articulating them, by bringing speech and communication to them. And that's why it's so important during this time to be speaking to somebody, whether it's a professional or at least a confidant or a friend or somebody, to be able to talk about your feelings, to be able to talk about the darkness. And that's the beginning point of navigating through whatever you're dealing with, again, whether it's coronavirus related, whether it's just ordinary life trials and traumas and tragedies, but it must begin through conversation, through articulating it to somebody, to something, right? Maybe it's just taking a walk and talking to yourself or to talking to the divine or whatever you believe, but talking. Words are real. And so to bring the conversation to the darkness is a starting point to face it. And as I mentioned before, really drawing great wisdom from the Kabbalistic tradition, where we read a lot about in Kabbalah transforming darkness to light. And it comes from the Torah, from this biblical idea of Vayer Vayiboker. There was evening and there was morning. When we count time in Judaism from the Hebrew calendar, we start in the nighttime, as many people know, not like the Gregorian calendar, which begins obviously still nighttime, 12:01, but really we think of the morning, the daybreak as kind of a new day. On the Hebrew calendar, the new day, quote unquote, begins with a new night at night. And so all Jewish holy days begin in darkness. And it's philosophical, it's theological as well. We're supposed to become godlike, the divine, co-creators, and transform darkness into light. That's why we light candles at the beginning of every Jewish holy day, symbolically to shatter darkness. Because Rabbi, the founder of Chabad, just blinked on his name, Liadi, Shneur Zalman of Liadi, who said, a little light dispels a lot of darkness. Right? It's pretty interesting, isn't it? One little flicker of a flame dispels all the darkness around it. And you grow that flame out into a fire, right? And just dispelling darkness. And so we begin holy time from a Jewish perspective in the darkness, committing to shatter it through illuminating. And that's candles, but it's lots of metaphors that really points to. How do we illuminate darkness? One of the ways that we do that on the Hebrew calendar and then it's true for all Jews, but especially for Israelis, is Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaAtzmaut, which are Israelis' Memorial Day and Independence Day. And it's deeply profound because they were chosen quite consciously to be juxtaposed. So 2 nights ago, we began Israel Memorial Day, and then last night we began Israel Independence Day. And they go back to back. It's sort of like putting Memorial Day in America on July 3rd. So you go from July 3rd and Memorial into July 4th. But one of the big differences is although so many have served this country and died for this country, most of us have not been directly impacted in this generation by those losses. It wasn't necessarily true at a particular time, a generation ago, but it's true today. And so I don't think we feel it. I know we don't feel it nearly as much as Israelis do, because there's not an Israeli you're going to meet who hasn't somehow been impacted by a loss due to one of the many wars that it's been forced to fight, or to one of the many acts of terror that it's been forced to endure. And so there's a profound sadness, sorrow on Memorial Day, Yom HaZikaron in Israel, that you don't always feel. You feel in certain segments here in America. But let's just be honest. It's mostly picnics. It's mostly a day off. Now every day is probably a day off, but it's not a day of sorrow for sure. It's a day of something else. And in Israel, it's a day of sorrow. It's a day of tears. You go to almost everybody goes to a cemetery or a memorial service, and the songs on the radio are sad. They're somber. The television programming is mood appropriate. There's a siren that goes off twice, and you get out of your car, the air raid siren, wherever you are. You could be on the highway, and you just see all these cars pulled over the side of the road, and to mourn, to pay tribute, and tears of sorrow. But what's interesting, and back to what we're talking about now, is it doesn't end there, because the Jewish mission, and Israel being the Jewish homeland, was designed around the Jewish mission, is to transform darkness into light. And so what do we do that night? Last night, you go from tears, literally tears, your tears haven't even dried up, of sorrow, into tears of joy. And that's the journey from Memorial Day to Independence Day. On any given street in Israel, and certainly in town centers across Israel, people are dancing the hora, partying. It's a truly festive celebration. Memorial Day there is more intense than Memorial Day in America, and Independence Day is more intense than Independence Day here because of the two, right? The darkness is greater, closer to it for 1,000 reasons, but then the light is greater too. And so, and they're also juxtaposed. They're next to each other. Again, imagine the energy if we went from Memorial Day on July 3rd to Independence Day on July 4th. You really kind of know what you're fighting for, literally. And that's how it feels in Israel. As you go from this sorrow and knowing the losses that occurred to make this possible, to have an Independence Day, to have a modern state of Israel that's free, and then the celebration that comes on the other side of it. And I guess here's the real crux of the matter: is it's not in spite of that darkness, it's because of the darkness that we celebrate so intensely on that calendar and in that way. Because again, Vayer Vayiboker, from darkness to light, that's the mission. It's an obligation, it's a sacred duty, where we owe it to those who came before us not to succumb to the darkness, not to give up in the darkness, not to stop living when they have stopped living, but in fact to double down, to live more fully, to love more fiercely, to get back out into light, life and light. After we faced it, I began this whole beginning of this talk by talking about facing the darkness, right? Not doing the voidance, a void dance, a dance around the void, but really facing it, but then moving through it, not staying in it. Right? You mourn, you grieve fully and completely, and then you come out the other side and you live fully and completely. Does it mean that the darkness went away? Absolutely not. It just means that the darkness has been harnessed. It's energy, and we've harnessed that energy for something good, for something great, which is life. And so it isn't about being morbid and going into darkness for darkness' sake. It's about when death's darkness in its myriad of form, when the dark deed descends into our lives, to face it, to feel it, to work through it, and then to use it and to come out the other side dancing, right? If you can't cry on Yom HaZikaron, Memorial Day, you can't dance on Yom HaAtzmaut, Independence Day. And these two go kind of hand in hand. And it's a sacred duty when we do that, right? We're redeeming our loved ones. We're making sure that the loss wasn't in vain. Again, I come back to my father. My grandmother's suicide was tragic. My father's response to it was tragedy compounded. What would have been a better response would have been for him to face the darkness, to go into the darkness, to articulate his way through the darkness, to come out the other side and to live more fully, not in spite of her loss, but because of it. That wasn't his choice. That's my choice. And you are making your choices, I'm sure. We all have all kinds of darkness that we face. We all have come out the other side. The fact that you're listening to this and watching this means that you have either come out the other side or you're in it and you're going through it. And my heart and prayers are with you if you are in the darkness right now. But that's the message of Israel today. Whether or not you're Israeli, whether or not you're paying attention to Israel, it's an important message and mission to take the darkness and to experience it and to come out the other side, utilizing it as a force for light and life in your life. And so that's what I do now all day, every day. I counsel people through all kinds of darkness. And it's not always just death. It's oftentimes the darkness that comes lots of loss. Working right now heavily with people who are transitioning from professional life to retirement, which I don't like to call it retirement. I think it's a terrible word. We need new language, but a reawakening to their, what I call it, the meaning phase of their life. People who are 60, 70 have spent a long career one track, knowing who they are, and now they're trying to reimagine themselves after 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years of this label, this title. So helping people reimagine themselves. And there's darkness, there's loss that's involved with such a transition in life. All life's transitions bring darkness, but they're facing it, and we're working through it, and we're extracting from it sparks, right? Opportunities and possibilities. And we're taking those sparks and we're utilizing them to start building a new life in a new direction, this source of light. And so that's what I do. I work with clients around all types of loss, and then shifting that into something more than the loss, even more than those sparks. Those sparks become a fire and a flame, and that flame becomes a legacy. And so how you live after a loss, or the second act of life, called the sunset phase, the meaning phase, right, creates light for those who come after us, but living your legacy while you're here, while you're alive. And so that's what I'm kind of doing during my days, is guiding people through this process, utilizing these concepts: Kabbalah, logotherapy, again, meaning-centered therapy, counseling, created by Viktor Frankl, a man who knew loss and also knew how to transform his loss, his darkness, into light for other people. And also these experiences, soul-centered experiences, lots of them going on. I got to actually jump and go teach a class for the Kabbalah experience here in Denver, Colorado. There are a lot of the classes around the world, virtual. And we're talking about the soul's journey from this life to the next life and back again from a Kabbalistic mystical perspective. So I'll be doing courses like that. But it's always about, how do we live a more meaningful life, a more purposeful life? How do we spend the second act of our life, the sunset phase, the meaning phase, right? When darkness comes, harnessing it, utilizing it, transforming it from darkness to light. That's the mission for all of us. And that's my hope and prayer for all of you. So until next time, you can get a hold of me, mysoulcentered.org. You can shoot me an email, rabbi@rabbi.com, or just Google Rabbi B, and you'll end up at my website. We'd love to hear from you. I'd love to get your thoughts, reactions, feedback. We'd love to work with you. So give me a shout. Until then, salam, shalom, namaste, and peace.